So looking at this second part here, we're going to start rotoing this kind of band that's going over the sky. One thing I wanted to mention is I was rotoscoping on the original footage, which is a 4K. So that's plugged into the roto shape, and if the roto shape is plugged into something, it will automatically take the format of it. But our project file is actually set to 2K because our final shot, we're going to shrink it down to 2K, like half the size basically. But if you unplug the roto shape, you see that our roto kind of goes crazy and it goes off of the format. But if I plug it back in, it looks like it fits. And that's because I rotoed it while it was plugged into this. So it's kind of adopted that 4K format. So when we unplug it, it's not lining up in a 2K project. But you can fix this by just plugging in a 4K reformat node beforehand, and the roto will take on that format and it will keep our roto lined up with our footage. So if I plug it into a grade, rather than plugging it in directly, we can see it's lining up. So I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to roto these in 4K format, and later on when we do our comp and if we scale the scene down to 2K, the reason we're doing that is because it'll be a little bit faster to comp, and we're going to be scaling this footage. So we're actually going to be animating this footage in a fake way to kind of make this character look like he's coming towards the camera. And if we're shrinking down to 2K, that means we have a lot of pixels that we can push in on and still maintain like a 2K quality. So that's kind of why we're doing that. But we'll get onto more of that later, but I just wanted to explain why there's a reformat here. And I'm going to put another reformat, and then we can plug a roto into that. And we can switch between either plugging it directly in footage or plugging it into this 4K reformat. For now, I'll keep it actually just plugged into the footage. And I'm going to start naming these so they're a bit more clear. So we'll just say main mats. And I'll call this one, just pressing N on my keyboard, I'll call this rope. And it's not really a rope, but whatever. So let's find a frame that's not completely blurred out. So we're not going to start rotoing on a frame like this because we don't even know what the shape of that area is necessarily. And there's also some areas that we don't need to actually roto. So if you remember, this is pretty much over an area that we don't need to cut out, because if I can draw here, yeah, this area is basically over, over white, so we'll be able to key it. But mostly this area, we might have problems, and potentially, most of this, pretty much all of this over the pillar, we're going to need to have some kind of alpha for it. We might be able to get some kind of mats, and we can play with keys later, meaning we can mix keys with our roto. But it's good to just start with a roto of this, because we already know if we try to start keying this, we're going to have some weird edges. So knowing that, I'm going to start here. So I'm going to find a good frame, not this motion blur frame. We'll probably start on, let's say, frame 42. It looks pretty good in terms of seeing some actual shapes of what this is. This is kind of a difficult thing to roto because we don't really know how this rope is warping around, but that's part of it. So I'm going to kind of section this into pieces here and do my best in terms of trying to figure out how this rope is flying around. And if it's not perfect, we can always go back and adjust it in the end. And that's usually, specifically for something like this, it's going to be probably necessary because this rope is kind of rotating like crazy and everything. So I'm just tapping left and right on my arrow keys to see how this thing seems to be rotating. And I'm going to go like this and kind of rotate this into place. So it kind of looks like this piece sort of is doing something like that. And I can press Z to smooth out my points. And we're probably going to need to add points along the way. So if I hit Control-Alt, I can add a point. And we can sort of add some points to add detail as we go along. So I usually start with less points. I don't add a bunch of points at the start. I add more points as necessary if the shape, let's say, becomes more complex. So this is an area that might not be completely solid. So I'm going to sort of keep the roto below that because we're going to want to see through that area as well. So if I tap my left and right arrow keys, we can try to keep track of where this thing's going. Again, it's going to be tricky, but we'll try to do our best. So I'll go through here and sort of do this. And this is another video I'll probably speed up at this point in terms of getting our alpha, because you're not going to watch me roto. So these rotos take time. You know, the other one took me, you know, a few hours of tweaking stuff. And that's let's say a practice of patience. So that's one part of the job that you'll have to do, and some people don't particularly enjoy it. Usually I will, you know, listen to a podcast or do something. If you're doing a type of work that doesn't require a lot of, let's say, conscious thought, you can use that time productively in other ways. And I don't know if that's relevant to this class, but I guess that is sort of something to think about. And so maybe I'll just pull the shape down a little bit. And this might be another shape here now, so it's kind of going off into like another shape. So I don't want to just start like changing this shape a whole bunch, because then the motion blur will kind of not match, because it'll think that this point is shooting outwards or something. So I think this is kind of a good start. So really I'm tapping back and forth with the left and right arrow keys, and I try to identify points that look the same. It's really hard with really motion blur things like this, but if you look at like this area where it's kind of a little bit lighter and it looks like the top of a piece, and then I go down, it looks like that top piece is still here. So that's how I'm kind of gauging where to place this. So I'll kind of look at that piece and, okay, this looks like it's similar. So I'll line it up like that, hit Z, kind of get these points lining up there. And maybe just pull these points down a little bit. And you could add a little bit of detail here. So something like that. So this is probably one of the more difficult things you have to roto. Things that are changing shape like a lot in terms of their form, like warping and organic surfaces or hair, are some of the most difficult things you can basically roto. And this would be probably one of those cases, because you can't exactly see the form. So yeah, I'm gonna end the video here, and I'll roto this out, and then we can talk about it and review. And just keep in mind, try to find good frames that don't have a lot of motion blur to figure out the shape of what you're rotoing. So we know the shape of this band. It's like a seat belt almost. So if we at least roto that shape to start, we know that, you know, I'll just do it here as one more example. We know that if this is sort of a, let's say, a seatbelt, sort of a flat plane that's warping, we should morph our shape with that in mind. So if we go here, we can sort of, you know, bend that seatbelt in perspective. But we know that that's sort of the shape that it actually is. And that will give us a good starting point. So something like this. I'll do like 3 frames just so we can see it. Also, what I'll do is look at things and try to measure them with my eyes, kind of. So I can see like this on a frame that's not blurry. We can see like this shape is this far from this shape. So we can see it's about that distance. So I know that this needs to be the same sort of distance, because the size of this thing isn't actually changing. It's just really hard to tell where things go. So I'm always trying to, you know, if it's that far away in 2D, we can try to keep it a similar distance. You know, it wouldn't be here, because then we're expanding it and the size would be changing. So we know that this needs to be sort of in the relative position to the previous frames. So that's how you can motion blur through something difficult. Roto through something difficult, is the thinking about object size and trying to keep those relative, I don't know, I guess you could think of them as like measurements in your head, the same. So if we just take a look at that, I'll do one more frame maybe, just so we can try to figure out. So So it kind of feels like it's the string is getting pulled this direction. So it feels like that might be going this way. And then this piece might be sort of like way up here. So this is where it gets pretty difficult because it's basically invisible. And it's over a background. So that the piece that we're rotoing has basically become invisible. And so I'm just going to do like 3 quick frames of it, and then we can like turn on the motion blur and see if it feels like it makes sense. So that's why in this instance, we'll probably have to go back and redo it a few times to like get something that seems like it makes sense. And that's the best we can do because we don't actually know the perfect accurate position of how this thing is flying around. So this might work. I'm going to turn on the motion blur and just take a look at the mat. So that's kind of probably what's actually happening, or something kind of close. So as long as it makes sense, it'll work in our final comp, and we can always make that part invisible in our comp, and that's fine as well. So even though we're getting this like motion blur of what this thing is, one way to do it is like move it around and see like maybe it should be more here. Like how does it logically sort of make sense? And that's why I rotoed a few frames ahead, even if it's not a good roto. At least it gives us an idea for the motion blur. So I can move it around. If we don't have the frames at the end, the motion blur isn't calculated. So, and we can see here that maybe our motion blur is a little bit off. Although it's a little bit hard to tell because the motion blur is very semi-transparent. So honestly, if this is a shot, I wouldn't even 100% try to match the motion blur perfectly. I would try to get as much as it that I can see as I can. But most people aren't going to nitpick you to, maintain a motion blur that you can't even see. So yeah, I'm going to continue rotoing this, and then we'll get back to it.